One of the companies that I've been doing some work with is Milliken Company, and it is on their training program that I'm doing my presentation on. Milliken is a privately held company that was founded in 1865. Their main focus is across 4 divisions, which are floor covering, chemical, performance products, and specialty fabrics. They have 40 manufacturing operations in 6 countries. They employ over 7,500 people and are involved with over 48,000 products. Milliken & Company's corporate headquarters, the Roger Milliken campus, are in Spartanburg, South Carolina. The 600-acre site is home to nearly 1,000 Milliken associates. The site features an innovation gallery, customer center, research facilities, a floor covering design center, Milliken guest house, and a nationally recognized corporate arboretum. Through its own manufacturing capabilities, Milliken & Company have developed award-winning, world-class safety and manufacturing systems. Due to many other companies' interest in benchmarking their operational performance, they decided to set up a consulting division called Performance Solutions by Milliken. It is the training program for this division that I have been involved with and am presenting on. Their organizational structure is they have a level of practitioners, then they have a category called advanced practitioners, and then senior practitioners, and then master practitioners. They're basically the coaches and mentors for everybody else down. So what they do, their entire training system is built based on a skills matrix. And the skills matrix has 3 tiers. There's major work classifications, medium, and minor items. The major skills areas are technical, talent development, strategy, innovation, financial, behaviors, and cultural and language considerations. Some of the minor classifications, obviously under technical, is their actual pillars, which they have 8 pillars, which include safety, 5S, continuous skills development, focused improvement, and some others. And then things like talent development, they've got mentoring, coaching, and under some of the other categories, there's things like leadership, innovation, etc. So they have, and what they do is they rate, each practitioner gets a associate development discussion, and they have a rating form, and they rate them on each one of those, and they have levels from 1 through 4. 1 is they know about the job, 2 is they can do with some degree of supervision, 3 is they can do with confidence without supervision, and 4 is when they're able to teach others. So they want everybody to pretty much be 3s across the board, with some 4s in each area that can then train the others. And as you can see, their strategic process that they even internally and with clients is basically a teaching, coaching, and mentoring structure. And of course, their philosophy is learn, lead, and leverage. And what they do is that once you're hired, which they have a pre-boarding process they go through for hiring. All right, so we're not going to go into a lot of depth on their pre-boarding process, but as you can see from this outline, it's very systemized and very structured. So, and they get people plugged in from day 1 as part of the pre-boarding, and that's all really it's typically all the HR and the hiring process. They then have a 5-week intensive onboarding program. So let's take a look at the onboarding program in more depth. And we're gonna start from day 1. They walk into the Milliken headquarters, and everybody from around the world is required to go to the Milliken headquarters. So Milliken, part of the culture is they want everybody to understand who their teammates are, who Milliken is, and really understand the corporate culture. So this is a global company. They've got global practitioners all around the world, but they expect them all to come to headquarters. So they basically tell them for 5 weeks, you're going to be in Spartanburg, South Carolina. And it's a very structured process. Week 1 is really about HR and induction, and really it's software and all the technical training and tactical training. So they get their laptops and they make sure that they understand the software and how to use it. And they also learn about company policy and do's and don't, and really all the human resources and employee manual type information. And basically, even at that point, they're looking for, maybe software. If there's any gaps in training, they want to understand that right away. They get that all up front as part of the first 1 or 2 or 3 days. Then in some part of that first week, the CEO comes in and basically talks to the entire class about the vision of Milliken. And he probably spends just 30, 45 minutes. And it's Joe Salas. And he comes in and basically talks about the vision for Milliken, and everybody gets the opportunity to ask him questions. And really what he's trying to do there is give them the wider view, why they're there, what they're trying to do as a company, basically things to watch out for and everything else that they need to. And also what he wants them to realize is that there's a linkage between all their divisions and the company and their clients, and it's not just silos. So it's very important they hear from him, and that's why he takes the time to do this. After that, the really next part of the 5-week onboarding process is going back to those fundamental pillars, which is basically the education on the Milliken process. So that's things like the 5S, the safety, focused improvement, and going through all their pillars. What they do is this whole training, basically just like the pillars, the left-hand side of the pillars are fundamental and the right-hand side is more advanced. And that's basically how this entire 5-week process is. They start out with fundamentals, and then as they get going on and on through the 5 weeks, they're learning more and more advanced techniques. So one of their fundamentals that's covered in the maintenance and the 5S's is the TPM, which is total productive maintenance, which is zero loss. And then some of the advanced pillars are the early equipment management and the new product development. And one of the reasons to start with that, obviously zero loss, and it's Deming's philosophy of zero loss. And it's hugely important because what they assume is that if the practitioners can't get this, they're really not going to get the rest of the system. They start talking about the strategic part, which is the why, the master planning, how they understand it, and why are they doing this, and what's the point, and how does everything fit together. They start with the foundational pillars, and then they move on to the advanced. Most of this training during this 5-week onboarding class is all done by other practitioners that are in the field, and they come back to headquarters and they teach it. There's probably 2 or 3 senior or master practitioners that come back and teach all these different classes. And then during part of this, every single day, there's also a presentation by the onboarding practitioners themselves. So they get to choose a topic, and nobody's allowed to choose the same topic. So there's all the different topics of everything they've discussed, and they have to put on a 30-minute presentation on any part of anything they've learned that day, as long as it doesn't overlap with somebody else. They rotate that through the 5 weeks. So basically, if you've done about 16 hours of training or so, there's about 4 hours of presentations within that. And if you go back to the skills matrix, what they're trying to do is get everybody eventually up to 4s in all the areas so that they'd be certified to train the others. And that's when they're able to come back and teach these classes too. And as part of this onboarding process, there's also a 2-day facilitation class. So not only are they presenting, but they're also learning how to present as part of this as well. It's not only can they train the clients, but they can train the trainers as well within the client's firm and their own firm. So basically the fundamental pillars take about 2.5 weeks, and that's about halfway through the 5-week onboarding process. And there's also some team building activities. There's the facilitation class, and they also do a whole day of financial understanding as well. During the next week, they have a graphical facilitation class that is really pretty unique, which again is instead of using PowerPoint, it's all about how to use different media to facilitate the group knowledge transfer. What they're trying to do is get more away from PowerPoint and moving on to more whiteboards and drawings and visuals. And what they've learned, if you think about learners, some of them are auditory, some are visual, and some are kinesthetic. And what you want to do is you don't want to eliminate the words, but you want to add some visuals to them. Everybody's heard the saying, a picture is worth 1,000 words. If you have the word yellow, but there's actually a yellow circle beside it, people will remember a lot more than just reading the word yellow in black and even highlight it. So this graphical facilitation class is a phenomenal class that they teach them as well, and it helps them how to present. Then there's also some more strategic type courses, such as running master planning sessions for a client, taking strategy deployment matrices, how do you take a client through their thematic goals, how do they create thematic goals, how do you facilitate a SOL analysis, how do you facilitate the ability to say, hey, we're not very good at what we do, but we're okay, we need to move and do something differently. How do you allow someone to understand the business case for change, etc. So there's a lot more advanced strategic level training in this during the first 5 weeks. And one thing to note, that this is all pretty much like drinking water out of a fire hydrant. And one of the analogies somebody once said, it's like putting a silicone chip in the back of their heads and really just downloading all of Milliken's process, procedures, and everything else in the first 5 weeks. And what they really wanted to work on is cascading the business goals and KPIs down, which is part of the training as well. And they learn a little bit of coaching, etc. And one of the big fundamental beliefs from Milliken is they're trying to get away from the normal command and control that exists in about 90% of all the manufacturing plants. Healthcare is not quite as bad. And obviously you can really see that structure in the military, and a lot of plants have used that hierarchy, but they really are trying to get away with it with more knowledge workers and more strategic process. And during this, one of the other things they're really trying to teach them is how to assess the situation, how to walk into a plant and start looking at it from a zero loss thinking mindset. And they call it learning to see. So basically they're teaching them how to see things like the equipment, different hazards, etc. Basically it's like a visual identification, sort of like hazard identification as well. And they break that up into people, product, process, and maintenance. And they're looking for both negatives and positives, but mainly opportunities to excel. I mean, their whole goal is to go into a plant and try and help them improve. They look at strengths and options and assess and try and understand a plan, which is they go in and teach them, and then they go in and do it one-on-one. So the way they do this is during the 4th week, they actually take them into a local plant, and they vary this too. They rotate the plants, and they have several people going with them. And basically they have the practitioner that's going through the onboarding go in and assess the facility. And the other thing they require them to do is actually create their own report. So they don't give them templates. They don't, obviously Milliken does have some templates they use over time, but what they want to see is how the practitioners can actually structure their reporting back. And they actually use this as part of their assessment program, and they get a lot of feedback on people, how they did it. And really they can really tell during this phase about the leaders, the high potential people, and some of the people are not going to make it. And they really see the 4th week as part of the crunch part of this training. And a large part of it is, can you actually take what you're seeing and put it into a usable report? And that sometimes is the biggest gap, which is really what's difficult for people to do instead of just working off of templates. Now, one of the interesting things about this process is they've got obviously these new hires, and these new practitioners that are going through this process are obviously not Milliken people. They're coming from different plants, different industries, different sectors. And it's really interesting because they get different viewpoints. And Milliken also uses this as part of its own internal continuous improvement. They see how these new practitioners are writing the reports and the information of what they're seeing, and this actually gives them some different innovations and different ideas that maybe they haven't thought about. Now, they run this onboarding process about 4 times a year, roughly. Now, one thing that Milliken do use is what they call the 70-20-10 model, which is really just a theory of adult education, which is basically we learn 70% of things through actual experience. We learn 20% through learning from others, which is really the coaching and mentoring side of it, and only 10% through formal learning programs. And you can see that Milliken do this throughout their program. And if you look, I think this model is really based on Edgar Dale's cone of learning that he called it, which again, if you look at that, obviously we remember 90% of what we say and do, and obviously only 10% of what we read, hear, and see, and 30% up there. So you can see that. But even Edgar Dale, if you look at the quote on the left, Confucius said, "I see and I forget, I hear and I remember, I do and understand." So this is not new thinking. Pretty much way back in ancient times, they realized that we understand and we retain more by doing. You can see throughout this whole process that Milliken use this as part of their training. And it's really interesting too, because part of their evaluation is they evaluate the presentations. So again, as these practitioners are coming through the onboarding process, each day they're required to present for 30 minutes on something, at least a group of them anyway, they rotate it. But so basically they're being graded on their presentations, but also by presenting it, there's a saying that in order to learn it, you have to teach it. So they're actually getting them to teach something they learn, which actually helps them gain it even more. And at the same time, they're learning to present in front of people, which may be new skill sets for some of these practitioners. And they're being graded on that, and they're constantly evolving that as well. You can see that Milliken really practices, and by going out in the plants as part of the training, they're actually going into the facility, learning how to identify hazards, and then learning exactly what Milliken do as part of this entire process. So even the evaluation system that Milliken uses is part of this hands-on practical evaluation. It's not just sitting down and memorizing the material and taking a test on it and having to answer questions about it. It's actually, can you present the material and can you structure your presentations coherently? And what they're really looking for here is during these formal presentations, they have a panel of 3 to 4 people from the practitioner world, and they really grade them on the facilitation side. And again, it's not typically the content they're worried about, which most of these people have a pretty good understanding of the content already, but they're trying to understand, can they transfer this knowledge to other people during these presentations? And at the end of the 5 weeks, there actually is a practical examination as well, though. It's really about a 3.5 hour final exam, so to speak. And there's also an essay maybe they have to write. And again, this is part of their process because, again, one of the things they do have is English is not always somebody's first language. So a lot of people are English as a second language practitioners. They have Portuguese, Spanish, French practitioners. So a lot of times there's a gap here in being able to present this, and they're making sure they understand it all. Now, after they've passed the onboarding in the 5 weeks, they're still not technically billable, and they're not going to send them out on the client side by themselves. So what they have is an observation period, which is basically 3 months of shadowing somebody. And again, it's actually pretty flexible here. It's between a month and 3 months. And they go into plant, and they're working with one practitioner that's kind of their coach and mentor. So what they will do during this on-site observation period is start out by shadowing the practitioner that is their coach and mentor, and gradually they'll start taking over a training session. They'll start out maybe taking over 1 hour, and then 4 hours, and then 6 hours. And it really depends on how quick that person picks it up. And again, it's very situationally dependent on the client. And there's cases where there may be 8 on-site practitioners, and they go in, they may do it quicker because they've got more coverage and more coaching and mentoring. Whereas if they go to a client site where there's only one practitioner or two practitioners, it may take them a little longer. And Milliken is very aware that obviously they're still trying to cover their brand and their reputation. So they want these individuals to be very competent before they're billable and on site as a practitioner by themselves without shadowing somebody. By doing it this way, not only are they ensuring that the practitioner is ready and can take on these, but they're also evaluating them. So the other practitioners there as coach and mentor are observing them and training them along the way while they're presenting pieces of the day until they are able to take it over fully on their own. The on-site evaluation is part of this. As you can see, again, this follows the adult learning process, which is the learn by doing. So they let the practitioner go on site, take over some meetings, and they're evaluating them, how they do it, and coaching them and guiding them on. So that's really the Milliken system training part of it. Now, the next area we go to is their continuous learning. On top of the structured career and Milliken training is more self-development and personal development as part of what Milliken completely supports. And they're required to do 40 hours, which is mandatory. Milliken uses their skills matrix to look at the systemic issues within the business. And when they do this analysis, if there's a systemic issue, Milliken will create training for everyone. However, if there's individual gaps, they will leave it to the individual to fix those gaps. For example, if they have a problem with politically navigating companies or understanding how to influence, they see a need for that, they'll go out and train 10 or 15 practitioners all in a group. So that's an example of a systemic gap. However, if it's individual gaps, they actually enable the practitioners to go out on their own, find a course, get it approved, and then take it on their own. Their viewpoint is that they don't want to spoon feed the practitioners on their own personal development. It's their responsibility to cover that. So again, personal gaps are left within the practitioner to develop themselves. Systemic gaps, Milliken takes responsibility for and trains them as a group. Also, as part of this, what they do is each practitioner will meet with their senior practitioner and report back on this training. And sometimes, occasionally, they'll, as part of their best practice and continuous improvement, they will actually suggest courses that everybody else can also take, or perhaps once in a while they'll take a course and teach it in a group as well if somebody has found it very beneficial. And what Milliken actually do is give them a stipend of $2,500 a year to pursue these courses. And again, it has to be approved. And also, they are a little flexible. If they've got some high potential practitioners, they may let them spend $3,500 perhaps if they find something. And this is an example of the system. They call it their GEM system. It's the Milliken Global Education Management System. And this is where you can track the courses of yourself, or the advanced practitioners can track the coursework of the practitioners underneath them. So they basically put in the courses they've taken, course IDs and some other things like that, and they mark it off and they can track their education throughout the year and make sure they're getting their 40 hours. And also Milliken have some Milliken University courses they offer internally as well. And again, some of these are online, some are offline, some are external consultants doing this, and some are internal consultants. And as part of the evaluation for this, they do several things. There's actually an associate development discussion, which takes place maybe every 3 months, maybe 6 months. So quarterly or biannually, depending on the practitioner, how much they need. And they do have a form for this, which is called their Personal Self-Development Annual Assessment. And they will review this and try and determine any gaps in it, as well as using the skills matrix and the ratings there that are both done by the individual as well as by the advanced practitioner over them. And again, that'll help them develop the gaps, and then they go through a specific development plan, and they outline the training they're going to do for the following year, and then they pursue it and keep them on track on it. Performance Solutions by Milliken, an organization that truly believes in continuous improvement. They are firm believers in the plan, do, and review methodology, and have robust evaluation and assessment systems in place that provide constant feedback to which they then adapt to. They also believe in the investment in their practitioners from both the time and money standpoint. And each practitioner has a personal training expense account of $2,500 to use for any approved training. The Milliken training philosophy is that they cover all systematic training issues. However, it's up to the individuals to work on their own personal development. This is truly an organization that practices what they preach, and it is evident in part through their training program.